Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ash here coming at you today in Clash Royale, and boy, are you guys in for a treat today, my friends. I have Marcelp on. This guy is one of the best players in the entire game, bar none. That's it. He's a beast. He's an absolute stud. And look at his profile right here. Over 200k challenge cards won. Almost 30k tournament cards won. His high cups is over 5,300. He's been on TV Royale 3 times. He's the three-time CRNAO Finalist. He's going to be in the finals in LA this weekend in the Duelers Arena event. That will be a blast. I'll be there. I hope to see some of you guys there as well. He's a co-leader in Reddit Alpha. He's a Super Magical Cup winner of the entire thing. This guy's a beast. It's Marcelp, and you guys are gonna love this conversation. It went a little long, but truthfully, I just couldn't get enough of this guy. He just has so much game knowledge. It's incredible. So, I mean, that's the point of these pro tip videos, right? I want you guys to walk out of these videos a better player than when you walked into them, and that's what it's all about. So hopefully, well, definitely, that's going to be the case today. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this conversation with Marcelp. All right, guys, so here I am joined by first-timer Marcelp. What's going on, Marcel?
Hey, Ash, I'm good. How are you doing?
I am stoked to have you on, man. You're definitely one of the best players in the game, so this is an exciting day for me. I'm really happy to have you here.
Hey, very happy to be here. I'm a big fan of your content for sure, so happy to help out in any way.
Thanks, bro. So I have a lot of questions for you today, so we'll kind of hop right into it. Now, I already told you that I want to kind of structure this video so it really helps people on how to differentiate really good ladder decks versus really good tournament decks, and how to kind of pick between the two and kind of build a deck around a given archetype to suit one of the play modes. So, but before we get to that, why don't we start with just a general question, and how long have you been playing? Tell us a little bit about yourself, so to speak, and when did you figure out you were good?
All right, so I started playing in about March or April, I want to say. Back then, I was a big fan of Hearthstone, and I saw this game, Clash Royale. My brother introduced me to it. The games were a little shorter than Hearthstone, which I was pretty interested in, sort of 2-3 minute games. So I played a good amount just in random clans back in the day, and then I saw myself facing a lot of over-leveled players on ladder. I think that's a sign that you're at least better than the average player.
Yep.
And then my trophy count at some point got high enough that I could at least look into more competitive clans. I'd been lurking on Reddit pages, and then so Reddit Alpha was sort of one of the clans you want to join. And I think it was when I was able to get in and see that I paired up pretty well against most of the players in Reddit Alpha that I was like, oh, maybe I do have a chance to be a decent player. And I think tournament modes came around, and I did decently in some of those. And then I think the tournaments that really sort of made me feel like, all right, maybe I should invest more time into this because it seems like I have some potential, were like the Super Magical Cups, and then more recently the CRNAOs, the Clash Royale North American Open.
Yeah, and you actually made it to the finals. So congratulations, man. I'll be seeing you soon.
Thanks. Yeah, looking forward to traveling to LA. That'll be on December 17th. Hope people here can watch. It'll be live streamed. Really exciting.
Yeah, and if maybe someone wants to like comment, and maybe we'll like say or do something funny on air.
Yeah,
when we're there.
Good.
Nah, but were you nervous at all for any of that, or were you at this point? Are you kind of like calm, cool, and collected?
I'm definitely still a little nervous in terms of I haven't played that many live events. I mean, I think at this point playing online events is something I'm quite used to with all the ones I've played so far. But definitely playing in front of an audience, and just I think they have us playing on iPads as well. I'm usually playing on an iPhone, so it'll be something to grapple with. But yeah, definitely looking forward to it. There'll be some nerves, but hopefully we'll see what happens. I'm looking forward to it for sure.
Well, I have my money on you, man. You're definitely, you've won a few of my tournaments, even like the 1K tournaments, and obviously plenty of others given your profile. So I think you're one of the favorites, man. So I'm excited for it. And it's easy for me to say because I'm not playing. I'm just talking about it. But, so, you said you played Hearthstone before this. Do you think that really helped you out when transitioning to a game like Clash Royale?
A little bit. I think there are definitely still things that I was missing. I wasn't a top tier Hearthstone player for sure. I didn't make it quite the legend rank, if viewers know what that is. But I've been playing games all my life, so I want to say that in terms of like basic game strategy, I played MOBAs as well, League of Legends, Dota.
What
I
is a
sort of
gamer?
had that already.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been a gamer all my life. So
What was your first system?
yeah. First system, I think it was the N64. I don't go way back. I'm 23 years old right now. N64 was sort of one of the first ones my parents got for me. I played Super Mario
Yeah.
64. That was a lot of fun.
Heck yeah. A little Star Fox, a little Bond, GoldenEye.
Definitely both of
Nice.
those games as well. Yes.
Nice. Well, so you're a great ladder player. What is your high trophies right now?
I've reached 5,300, I believe is my
Wow.
personal
Beast
record. So
mode. And you've also have over 210K challenge cards won. So,
yeah, I'm proud of the number of cards. Maybe not the number of hours I've put in, but definitely the number of cards.
well, certainly there is a time element to that. So that's one of the reasons that you have that many cards. But on top of that, do you just, let's start with the challenges specifically. So do you look at challenges? I mean, obviously the card levels are the same, but do you look at challenges in the same exact way you look at tournaments? And do you have any specific tips for challenges?
So there's definitely a huge difference, right? Just to start with the format, you have a longer game, overtime's 3 minutes, and you have the level caps, right? And so just with those, not even getting to other things, you have just chip damage decks have much more viability. You have interactions are a lot more stable. I don't think it's reasonable on ladder for players to know, well, will a level 3 log plus an ice golem with level 10 kill level 12 art? Like, you're not going to memorize all these interactions, right?
Yeah.
But in level caps, it actually is useful to have all this information because you can sort of hang your hat on a lot of these things just staying the same, right, from game to game is one thing. The other thing is with ladder, I often try to build my decks around what I think will appear more often. I think on ladder, it's a lot easier to sort of predict what the meta is for your trophy range. So I mean, I guess nowadays at any trophy range, you're going to see Royal Giants, right? We know that. Maybe not at the very top because everything's pretty much level capped, but you basically try to pick cards that'll counter what you'll see often, right, in ladder. Whereas in tournament caps, I find that there are a lot more deck archetypes and just decks in general that are viable. So I try to build decks that are more well-rounded. I want to say for challenge decks.
So when you're starting a challenge deck, you're picking maybe your best counters first, or are you picking your win condition first? Like if you're going to build a deck that you think will be, maybe you want to try something a little bit new, or maybe you want to like make changes or just start fresh.
Yeah, so for a challenge deck, I want to say if I didn't have all the cards unlocked, I definitely would want to start off with what win condition I want, right? Because then that's going to sort of tell me, all right, what supporting cards do I need? And if I don't have any of those, or if they're not up to tournament level, then I would just sort of throw that out, right? I think that's how I would start, and that's how I start most of the decks. Is all right, what's my win condition? What is sort of the and not only win condition like in terms of one card, like for example with Graveyard, if you're playing Graveyard as your win condition, you need a lot more other cards that are sort of necessary in the deck. You need a Fireball or Freeze. You definitely need a Zap. So you want to know what card slots are already used, right? Once you make that decision, for sure.
Okay, yeah, and we're going to ask you about your favorite decks for both ladder and tournament in just a bit, but specifically on challenges, what's your average win streak on a challenge? Like a guy like you who's, one of the best players in the game, please tell me you're not averaging like 11.5 wins or 10.5.
I want to say that I'm usually not too happy if I'm not able to hit 12. I don't know. I aren't able to tell you exactly what the average is.
Okay.
I usually, it depends, I guess. If I'm experimenting with decks or I'm trying something out, then I'll definitely come across some runs, right? I don't even hit 10, for example. But if I'm going full-out try-hard mode and I've got the serious deck, usually nowadays it's a Graveyard deck, and sort of going for just trying to get as close to max level cards as I can. That's sort of my motivation to play a lot of challenge decks.
You're farming.
So I'm farming, trying to max out without spending on super magical chests, right? That's usually the reason for most people.
Exactly, yeah.
But when I'm trying hard, I would hope to get 12 most of the time.
And how many times are you playing a day? How many challenges would you say do you average a day? Do you like have a schedule now of challenges that you try to get, fitting into your time schedule?
It used to be my goal to get like at least one win, one or two, but for the most part, I do my best when I'm able to play them straight. I think you sort of get into the zone where you're But it depends. If you're winning, then I think that really helps us to sort of keep going, stack one game over the other. There are definitely still times, obviously, where schedule doesn't permit, but for the most part, that's what I try to do if I'm really trying to go for wins.
Okay, so moving on to, well, before we get to the ladder play, what is your favorite overall deck archetype? Maybe not specific deck right now, but do you feel your comfort zone is one of the main archetypes?
So I think just overall, I enjoy decks that are sort of, I don't want to say uncounterable, but where your opponent can feel a little helpless.
Okay.
I think I prefer decks where it's more on me to make the good plays, and if I make the right plays, it'll be really tough for my opponent to make the right decisions, right? The opposite of that, I want to say, is zap bait, where if your opponent makes all the right calls, so they zap the right things, they don't zap, they take chip damage when they're supposed to. I feel like there's sort of a way to play around that if you make all the right decisions. Whereas, say with a Rocket Cycle deck back in the day when that was more viable, if I made all the right calls on defense, they're not going to stop the rocket to their tower, right? They better find a way to get through my defense. But if my defense is perfect the entire game, then I feel like that's sort of an archetype that I enjoy playing more.
Yes, you just basically, I mean, you're the typical control player. You love taking those, positive elixir trades on defense and then converting them to, in that case, the rocket, basically.
Yep, definitely an OJ fan.
Nice.
Positive elixir trade.
Of course. So what do you think makes a good ladder deck? You already talked a little bit about when you're building a ladder deck, you prefer to, think about what's in your range and what you have to counter. Beyond that, I mean, obviously, why don't we start with how do you handle card rarity when building a good ladder deck? So for somebody who's not 100% maxed out, would you recommend when building a ladder deck they take a higher level epic, for example, even if they don't like that card as much as an under-leveled rare card? Like, how does rarity come into play when building a ladder deck?
Right. So for viewers that aren't aware, there's sort of relative levels for rarities. What I mean by that is a level 9 common is the same as the level 7 rare is the same as the level 4 epic and a level 1 legendary, right? So you can sort of have everything on the same playing field in terms of levels. And so from that aspect, you definitely want to be playing a deck that sort of maximizes the levels that you have. So really early in the game, that usually means you play more epic cards, right? Because if you unlock cards just really early on, you'll have a level 1 epic and a level 1 rare. You definitely want to play the epics because they're just higher in terms of relative level. But as you progress, you definitely are able to unlock commons more. I'm sure people all know this. And so for that, you definitely are going to end up in a scenario where you have more sort of higher relative levels for your commons and much more the same for your opponents, right? That's why you have the Royal Giant being sort of overpowered when you have that win condition, a common card, and you have it way over leveled compared to your others.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
So do you think people should, if their only goal is to reach a new personal best and they don't care about anything else, do you recommend using a level 12 Royal Giant deck versus like a level 9 Hog Rider deck on ladder play?
Yeah, if your goal is to push as high as you can, I would recommend cards like Royal Giant for sure is one card. A card that I think is a little underrated still, at least at the level I'm playing at, it seems like aren't many people aren't using it. Are Barbarians. I think in challenge mode it's definitely a little underused, but for tournament caps you can have. It's a really good counter to Royal Giant. It's a good counter to Giant. It's a common card, so you can level it up quite a bit. And so I've been experimenting with Barbarians in a graveyard deck of mine. And when I come across cards that are of higher level, they do work. Those Barbarians are great.
So, like, on ladder play, somebody like me, I love Barbarians too, by the way. I think they're great, especially, like you said, versus Royal Giant. It's awesome to have them. But for someone like me with, maxed out minions, and then my Mega Minion is level 9, but Mega Minion is so powerful in the game, like, how do you handle that? Would you go minions because they're level 13 and obviously over-leveled, or do you go with a card that's just powerful that you think fits better in the deck regardless of level?
I think it's important to recognize which cards are sort of level dependent and not. So with the Mega Minion, I would say it's one of the cards that is not. Right? What I mean by that is minions are definitely level dependent in that if you have level 11 minions and your opponent has level 13 zap, for example, they can just zap your minions off the board, right? With a Mega Minion, you're guaranteed that I think it's like if you're 3 or 4 levels below a fireball, then maybe it can get one-shotted by a fireball. Yeah. But besides that, there aren't too many interactions. I think the one with Mega Minion is it doesn't one-shot archers of a higher level. That can be a little annoying. But you definitely want to recognize cards like that, right? Where, let me think of other examples. Like goblins, for example, are decent on ladders. You have them higher level because then they don't get one-shotted by zap.
Skeleton arm. Well, skeleton arm is not a common, but zapping, not killing them at max level or lower level zap.
Right.
Yeah.
So you definitely want to recognize what those cards are, and then from there you can say, all right, my card is under leveled, but it doesn't really matter because the no interactions change, like with Mega Minion, so I'll go ahead and play it. I think it's the same with like Giant as well. Royal Giant, if it's under leveled, you can still play it. It's not going to sort of ruin any interactions, right?
Do you think there are...
card...
Sorry, go ahead.
A card like Furnace, I guess, is the opposite, where if you're 1 level under, it doesn't do any chip damage, right? It doesn't reach a tower.
Yeah, definitely a good point. It's always a bummer, and it's always a great thing when you have the furnace, when you have the higher level furnace, or your opponent has a lower level, and you're like, yes, it doesn't bother me at all. It's awesome. So, yeah. So, do you think there are any cards specifically that you think just overall perform better on ladder than tournament? Like, I mean, one that comes to mind is a higher level freeze card because, it's so level dependent in terms of, the gain that you get from leveling it up. Are there any other cards like that you just think are like definitely ladder cards?
I would say Barbarians are definitely that for sure until you get up to the very top. Again, we know Royal Giant. I'm sort of listing obvious ones. A card that is not a ladder card, I would say, is Lava Hound. Usually people are able to level their zaps a lot higher of relative level to a Lava Hound, and if they have the zap 1 level higher, they can zap your pups off the board. So unless you have, for whatever reason, a really high level Lava Hound, I wouldn't recommend playing that on ladder. And for that reason, that actually then sort of props up a lot of other cards on ladder, as you know which ones aren't going to show up, right? Lava Hound's not going to be common on ladder, and so more ground troop heavy decks are a lot more viable on ladder as compared to challenge mode, if that makes sense.
It does. It makes perfect sense. So yeah, those are all good tips. Actually, Marcel, most of my viewers are probably somewhere like in the Arena 8 or early Arena 9 range, so maybe like a 2,500 to 3,500 cup range. And a lot of them are kind of struggling to take that leap and maybe just improve their personal best by 100 or 200 cups. Is there anything that you can help players like that, or any tips that you can say to help players who are kind of just, they've kind of hit a wall and kind of sick and tired of ladder play because they can't seem to get over a given threshold depending on their card levels?
So I think one of the biggest tips I can give to players at any level, but specifically at that level, trying to improve their game, is try and recognize what it is you're losing to. So maybe it's a certain deck archetype you're losing to. If it's just pure levels, then maybe you could try and find a deck that isn't so level dependent. That's a little tough to say, not knowing what your card levels are. But to go back to the first point, I think if you're able to recognize what decks or what deck archetypes you're losing to are, one big tip that has helped me improve a lot, and other players in my clan as well, is to try and play that deck yourself. I think one of the best ways to learn how to counter a deck is to play that deck and then see the games you lose, what did your opponent do? Yeah. I think I've really improved at defending against graveyard decks because I've played so much graveyard myself lately. And so just knowing, being able to estimate, when you need to zap, when you should hold the zap, and how much damage is the graveyard going to do, you're able to learn a lot of that when you play the deck yourself. And so don't be scared to try out certain decks, even if I know a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to play Royal Giant because it's so overpowered. I don't want to sort of add to the sort of meta of turning it that way. But I think if you're looking to improve and you're looking to boost your personal record, definitely try out certain decks. You don't have to stick with them, but I think just being able to see what gives decks a hard time will help you when you then face it yourself.
Yeah, that's great advice. And you know what? You mentioned it, and I'm going to take the bait, Marcel. So what have you learned about Graveyard that you can share with us? Like, what is the best way to defend a Graveyard?
So I think one of the things that's really underrated that people don't do, even really good players have noticed, is that they don't tend to zap or log it either at the right time or at all.
Okay, so how long do you wait?
So I would say it really is dependent on you look at the number of skeletons in your tower, right? And when it builds up to a point that you can tell, maybe you have 2 archers, right? And your opponent is able to tank your tower with an ice golem. I believe the spawn rate of skeletons is 0.5. Depending on how early you place your archers, there could easily be an excess of skeletons. You count for 10 seconds, and you sort of estimate, all right, is there going to be an excess of skeletons, and like when will there be the most, such that you haven't taken so much damage yet? It's a bit tough to judge. I would say definitely use your zap or log is one thing. I've seen a lot of players where
so just don't be afraid to actually defend.
Yeah, use your zap, use your log, and don't use your zap and log on other stuff, right?
Yeah.
A lot of hog players will try and get an extra hog swing with a zap. And while an extra hog swing is nice, I would argue that the value for your zap is a lot greater if you zap 10 skeletons in your tower, for example. So save it like you would for a goblin barrel.
So as soon as you sound like you're saying, as soon as you know that your opponent has graveyard, basically just don't blow your archers and your zap or your log or whatever like on needless other stuff unless you can really get a ton of value.
Exactly. Good graveyard players will pick up when you don't have zap or log or archers in your hand, and then they go graveyard. Then you're in big trouble.
Okay,
so if you save that...
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. I have a million questions now.
Oh, yeah, sure. Go ahead.
No. Go. Finish your thought. Sorry.
I think the other card I was mentioning was an Ice Golem. Although Ice Golem is cheap, you can usually cycle back to it. It's also pretty key at defending graveyards. So your archers, Ice Golem, and Log are sort of the cards that I'd say are a bit more underrated at defending it. Not talking about the minion hordes, which is obviously a really good card.
Yeah, I see some players in a pinch using Tombstone to defend. Is there a certain place you like to put that, or is that just basically if you're in a real big bind?
I would say Tombstone's good against Graveyard Freeze because actually it's good against both spells, but I want to say Graveyard Freeze especially because you get the value of the skeletons afterwards, even if they freeze the Tombstone. And so Tombstone's not a bad option. I think placing it early if your opponent doesn't have a giant or a hog is a good idea because then they're forced to graveyard into it and they're sort of in an awkward spot, right? They don't want to do that.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of players, a lot of top, good players doing exactly that, like preemptively putting the Tombstone down where they know the tower is going to be targeted with a graveyard. So that's good advice. So flip the tables for us. How about offensively? I know you're a big fan of the bowler graveyard deck. Why don't you tell us, before I ask a couple more specific questions, can you just tell us the overall philosophy on a general bowler graveyard deck or even a giant graveyard deck? Are you trying to cycle to graveyard to that big combo as much as possible, or are you playing things more, not so aggressively and kind of just waiting for your perfect spot?
So it really depends on the deck you're playing against, but for the most part, I want to say that graveyard decks almost, if you're playing it right, you should basically know that you could basically take a tower at most points in the game, right? As long as you're keeping track of what counters your opponent has. If you're able to set it, that's just how sort of undefendable it can be at times. You should almost know that you could take a tower. And so most of it, especially with bowler graveyard, is about defending well so that you don't get blitzed or you don't sort of blow a graveyard and then are unable to defend and lose the tower yourself.
So starting out a match, so what is your mindset going into it? Obviously, let's pretend your opponent is playing your mirror. So let's say you're going against another giant graveyard deck. What is your mindset going to be?
So the first thing I want to figure out is with graveyard is what are my opponent's counters? Are they playing archers? Are they playing minions? Are they playing both and skeleton army? Because what that means to me is when I'm trying to set up a graveyard push. If I know they have archers in hand, for example, I'm only going to set up a graveyard if I know I'll be able to fireball at the same time, right? So if I know I'm sitting at 6 elixir or 7, I know they have archers in hand, it's not a good time to push a graveyard, even if I have a bowler coming across the lane, because the archers or the minions are going to wreck my graveyard. So just recognize what their counters are and work from there. Another step to sort of look at is what's the rotation looking like in the game, right? If your opponent starts off with a giant or a golem in the back, usually you're sort of pressed to pressure them on the other lane, no matter what the scenario is. So maybe you could go with an early graveyard as soon as you see a golem dropped by your opponent. Maybe you don't know what their counters are yet, but you sort of have to, because if you don't, they're going to build up a big god push and wreck your tower. So a lot of it is dictated by rotation, but I think the biggest thing is recognize what your opponent's counters are and know what's in their hand for most of the game.
So can you tell us briefly, like, how you look at the role of the tank, whether it be like a bowler or a giant or a golem or whatever in a graveyard deck? Like, I noticed that some players just almost exclusively combo the giant in the graveyard or the bowler in the graveyard right at the river, especially in the last minute in double elixir. And some players almost always just start the big pushes. So can you tell us, like, what are you trying to do specifically, or any tips revolving around whatever tank card is in your deck, maybe even if it's an Ice Golem as your secondary tank?
Right. So Ice Golem is definitely the secondary tank. I would say Bowler is a big tank. So with the Bowler graveyard deck specifically, the Bowler usually starts off on defense, right? And so you could set up great counter pushes with Bowler defenses where your opponent, maybe you don't have graveyard in hand, right? To start out, your opponent starts a push, you defend with Bowler, and then you cycle the graveyard. You have this big health Bowler coming down. I would look at Bowler as more of the counter pushing type of push with graveyard. And you could sort of, it combos really well with Zap because to begin with, you have the Bowler tank for the graveyard, right? And then once your Bowler is maybe at like just about to die, you can Zap the tower, so the tower resets, and now you have this 1 HP Bowler that's still alive and throwing bowlers at the tower. That's one good tip I have for Bowler as a tank. The Ice Golem I see as a secondary tank when if you see your opponent blow one of their graveyard counters. So say they use archers for whatever reason to defend, or maybe you force it out really well. You are able to use Mega Minion offensively. They use their archers. You can quickly blitz them with an Ice Golem and Graveyard Push on the other lane, right? And they're not going to have their main counter. So I look at Ice Golem as more of, it's 2 elixir, it's so cheap, and getting the tower to focus on something else is actually really, really big for a graveyard. So that's sort of how I see Ice Golem's role. Giant is sort of like, it's not going to help. It's not going to help on defense, so it's more of an Ice Golem in that perspective. That's just bigger, right?
And most of the time, you're playing the big tank, unless it's one of those situations where they just burnt their counter card. You're mostly playing the tank behind your tower or somewhere near your tower and getting a nice stack behind them, or not stack even, but just buying you some more time to rebuild that elixir.
Right, exactly. If you're full elixir and they have their counter, the best place you just invest it in the back, right, with a giant.
Awesome. Well, those are really great tips. I think I'm gonna go ahead and try, as soon as we stop recording, I'm gonna try a Bowler graveyard deck, see what I can do. Like I've always had just mild success, to be honest with you. I'm more of like a Hog win condition player, so I like Three Musketeers, I like Hog Rider, I like cards like that. But honestly, I had a little bit of success early on with the graveyard golem decks that were really popular. And then when it kind of transitioned and shifted to a lot of giant and bowler decks, for whatever reason, and like the freeze became so popular, I started to kind of lose my flair for graveyard. And now maybe I'm just being too aggressive with it. It's tough, Like, do you see any common mistakes on graveyard play in general?
Yeah, so I want to say a lot of people. So the biggest mistake I want to say is using graveyard when they have their counter in their hand and you don't have enough elixir for a spell. Right? Mm-hmm. So I think one of the biggest things with graveyard and many other siege decks like Expo for whatever reason, you have to sort of know what's in your opponent's hand at most times, right? And you do that by sort of counting. If it's been 4 cards since an opponent has last played archers, then it's back in their hand. Just because Clash Royale works with fixed rotation, right? And so if you just keep track of what's in their hand, it sort of is a lot. You have to think a good amount more of these types of decks. But if you know or don't know what's in their hand, that can really be the difference in the game, and that'll basically tell you, should I push at this point or should I not? If that makes sense.
It does. That's good advice. What about Hog Cycle decks, real quickly, before I let you go? Is there any, we're watching some of your replays right now with the Hog Rider deck. Do you have any like general advice or maybe some common mistakes on Hog Cycle decks?
So I think one of the common mistakes with Hog Cycle decks is the myth of sort of you need to be constantly pressuring your opponent. Mm-hmm. Especially when your opponent plays sort of slow investing decks like giants or golems. If you're quote unquote constantly pressuring your opponent, say you just play a blind hog, right? Mm-hmm. You could easily get into a scenario where after your opponent has defended the hog, he then invests a golem or a giant, and then you don't have your Hog Rider in hand, such that you're left in a really awkward scenario. You have, let's say, Mega Minion, Archers, Tombstone, Ice Spirit. and your opponent drops a golem in the back. It's like, I want to have my hog to then pressure him, but you don't because you just used it, right? So I would say be very selective with your hog rider usage. I would say unless you know you can really outcycle your opponent in a way that you won't blow all your elixir, for the most part, you should be saving your hog for when your opponent plays these slow investment troops. Then you use the hog, and then you punish them. If you're sort of blindly using them, then you run into those scenarios, right, where they invest and you don't have a response.
Yeah, that's great advice, because so many times, just not even thinking, sometimes you're right. You tend to play aggressively because it's a hog cycle deck. So even like subconsciously, you're thinking to yourself, okay, I'm going to cycle hog, I'm going to try to outcycle my opponent. But it just doesn't work as well as it once did, with so many cheap decks especially. It's like every time it seems like they have their counter in hand, whether it be Cannon, Tombstone, Inferno Tower, whatever, And it just becomes more and more difficult. And oftentimes, at least for me, especially on ladder play, I get so many draws when I'm using a hog cycle deck, because it always seems like, I can get my opponent's tower down to like 800, and then I just need another 2 minutes, if I'm going to win.
Right.
It just like, it seems like, I learn my opponent's rotation and then they learn mine, and then we just kind of play it out. Is there any advice that you can have for that? Like, should I switch lanes with like a really fast hog cycle deck, even when I don't need to, even when I'm not playing against like a big tanky slow push deck?
So if you're not playing against a tanky slow push deck, I wouldn't recommend switching lanes. If you're playing against another hog rider deck and you both know each other's rotation, it really does sort of come down to grindy chip damage. I want to say if you don't want to go for the tie, then you could definitely go for more of prediction fireballs, prediction logs, that sort of thing. I think those are really what spell the difference in the sort of hog mirror matchups or cheap deck matchups. The same thing on defense. They could probably predict your cannon or tombstone placement as well. So be tricky with it. Place the tombstone way on the left if your opponent has been sort of predictively logging it every time. It comes down to these little tricky differences that you can make predicting on offense and defense as well.
Yeah, when you're in ladder and you're like way above 5,000 cups, is there any like mentality that you have in terms of playing aggressively, or are you more type of player that plays to draw sometimes if you have to? Like, are you just not about losing cups, or how would you kind of rate your play style?
So when I'm able to push as high as I want to in ladder, it eventually happens where the wait times get a little longer for each ladder game. And so with that, it gets really annoying when you wait a long time and then lose.
Yes.
So I want to say I definitely play safer and sort of trying to read my opponent, figuring out what their win condition is, what their counters are, and try to play as smart as I can, I want to say. There definitely is a lot of fun as well in sort of just going for it, risking stuff here and there. I think that's more fun at the beginning of the season. But when I'm trying to push high and I'm waiting 3 minutes a game, I definitely want to try as hard as I can and not make any sort of dumb decisions.
It's good advice really for anybody trying to reach their own, or beat their own personal best, because I know that whenever I play more conservatively, kind of like you said, even if I feel like I'm playing super defensively, in reality, I'm probably just playing smart, It's probably not really super defensively. It's just not being overly aggressive, which is probably my tendency,
Right. One more tip I'll throw in there for playing conservatively or aggressively is the first play of the game can actually make a big difference. If your opponent starts out just throws their minions out, there's a good chance that you could just punish them with Ice Golem Graveyard the other lane, right? Because they probably don't have another graveyard counter.
Yeah.
So I think just being really patient to start out games is a big thing. I think more than most players, I would just wait out my opponent. It works a lot better in challenges, because there's longer overtime. But even in ladder, people will usually make a play if you wait for 10 seconds or something. And so if you really want to win, be a little more patient. Wait for your opponent to make the first play, try and capitalize on that, or at least now you've figured out their rotation and you can maybe win this first trade that comes out, which can oftentimes be the difference.
Okay, and just, I feel like I could ask you a million questions. I apologize. We're going really long today. I hope the viewers like it. So, one more question though. Let's say your opponent, you outwait your opponent 30 seconds, and finally they play not split archers. Let's just say they play a mega minion in the right lane. And you don't have any obvious first play in your hand. Maybe you have like 2 spells, a bowler in graveyard, or maybe a mega minion in graveyard. Are you going to play the Mega Minion in the same lane and just wait a little bit so you have your tower to help you? Or what is your play going to be? What is your philosophy going to, how is it going to change based on what their first play is, if they don't go super aggressive at the bridge?
Right, so they make a conservative play. It really depends on the cards you have, right? So, for example, a Mega Minion or even split archers can actually be somewhat punished if you have a giant in hand. You play a slow push giant into the same lane, then you know that their Mega Minion archer is going to walk way too far up. Your supporting units behind the giant are going to kill it, and they basically almost lost that 3 elixir, right? If you don't have the response, then I want to say mirroring your opponent isn't a bad play. So if they play Mega Minion in the back, you have, as you said, Bowler, couple spells, and Mega Minion. Maybe look at what your 5th card is. But I would say Mega Minion in the back on the same lane wouldn't be terrible, and then try and sort of work out your rotation to fit what your opponent starts playing as well. Maybe you throw an Ice Golem in front. Yeah.
Great. Well, Marcel, you've been so generous with your time, and honestly, I've loved this conversation. I think you have so much great advice, so I definitely want to have you back on if you'd like to sometime. It's been such a pleasure, man. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. Definitely happy to come back whenever.
Good luck next week. This should be a great time. I think I'm pulling for you, as are all my viewers. So you have a nice team behind you, man.
Hey, thanks. At least I won't have any more tennis balls shot at me when I play next week.
This is true. I'll go ahead. If any of you guys haven't seen that, by the way, his arena duel, I'll go ahead and link that in the description. You guys should definitely check that out. It was looks like it was painful but fun, I hope.
Yes, definitely fun and a little painful as well.
All right. Well, thanks so much, man. Is there any way people can reach out and contact you?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter at Marcelp Clash, just one word. I'm also on Facebook under the same username if you want to add me and spectate games.
Awesome.
Definitely reach out.
I'm sure some people will take advantage of that, and there's definitely a lot to learn from watching you, as you can probably see through the replays too here, guys. Do you mind if people ask you questions about their decks or something on Twitter? I know I don't want to overflood you with info, but can people reach out to you?
Oh, no worries. Yeah, I'm definitely happy to respond. You tweet me or direct message me if I'm following you. I'm definitely happy to help.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much again, and we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good, Ash. Catch you later.
Bye-bye. All right, guys, so there you have it. There was Marcel P. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Again, personally, I think this was one of the best ones we've had yet. So, guys, I'll let you be the judge. Let me know in the comments below. And also, maybe you'd like to see Marcel P. in a Pro v Pro video. Let me know who you'd like to see him match up against. Guys, thanks so much for watching. And as always, take care, guys.